In 1978, John Carpenter released what is mostly considered the most important and possibly the most iconic slasher film of all time, Halloween. Then 4 years later, in 1982, he released his magnum opus, a sci-fi horror that not only revolutionized practical effects and pushed the boundaries of the genre, but cemented Carpenter as not only one of the best horror directors of all time, it cemented him as the horror director of all time. But in between these two horror classics, he released two other films. One being Escape from New York, which is also massively considered one of his best works, though not a horror, and the other being 1980's The Fog, which has been considerably neglected in the man's filmography, which is not only an injustice on Carpenter's behalf, but also film as a whole. Though never a critical darling, I mean The Thing was critically slated too, Carpenter has always been respected in the field of filmmaking, and yet this particular film has fell below the waist belt. Even with contemporary audiences, this film has struggled to find its status except the marginal but dedicated fanbase that it has. Roger Ebert even saying that it was an idea that just doesn't work out. And I'm here to tell you that he was wrong. Spoilers for this film ahead. So this movie starts with a quote. The quote is from Edgar Allan Poe's famous poem, A Dream Within a Dream. And it says, "Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream?" Which is a fascinating quote to attach to this movie, because there is nothing in this film that suggests it's all a dream or that the people within the movie are hallucinating or anything along those lines. So what does it mean? Well, the original poem talks about the dreariness of reality, the pain of it, but also reality is an illusion within itself. Maybe Poe is just trying to convince himself of something, that his life is a dream, to make the pain of what he's experiencing less. It's an interesting point of view, but it also isn't entirely original, because the poem is playing off of the dream argument, or also known as the dream hypothesis, which is quite a few hundred years old. The argument, put simply, suggests that often when we are dreaming, we're not aware of it. So how do we know that everything we are experiencing now, you watching this video or me making it, isn't a dream? Then, when we eventually dream in our sleep, is that not just a dream within a dream? Our senses cannot fully be trusted because they are what we use to distinguish reality. Yet they often lie to us unconsciously when we are awake and mostly when we are dreaming. Now granted, I'm not an expert on the philosophy, but it seems to me that this attaches itself to this story perfectly well once you dig into the events and the implications. So let me continue and we'll circle back to this. So once we pass the quote, we get a taste of what the film is really about. We open with a man telling a story, assumedly a fictitious retelling of the origins of Antonio Bay, the film's setting. The story is generally about a colony of lepers that got baited into crashing ashore of this not yet established town so that the conspirators can reap the rewards of the gold aboard the ship. One of these men even being a priest. The story takes place exactly 100 years before the events of the film, and then we move on to the actual film. First of all, this story and the setting instantly builds an incredible amount of suspense that does not let up for the entirety of this runtime, which by the way is a relatively short 1 hour 29, but this runtime suggests the film is clean cut, there is no fat. Everything is capitalized on, and that's made more impressive as Carpenter takes a moment in time here to tell a story he does not regularly, which is one of many little stories. Usually his films entail one protagonist and one antagonistic force, or in the case of multiple protagonists, they're experiencing the same story. However, in The Fog, we experience quite a few individual stories all twined together using the same antagonistic force. Carpenter also switches up his style of slasher slightly too. He delves deeper into implied horror. The fright of this film is not in the gore because there isn't any. There's kills, but it's of a very understated nature. The first kill we see is close, intimate, and soundtracked only by the sound of stolen breath. What's odd is, something happened around this time, and that was that Cronenberg had released his film Scanners, which in Carpenter's mind upped the ante in terms of horror and gore. So he felt the need to not regress and at least match that, so he went back in and filmed a lot of the death scenes. But that's the odd thing. These murders don't feel like an afterthought. They don't feel like they inserted these moments to add gore because they realistically don't. because though Carpenter may felt like he needed to match Cronenberg, he never compromised his original vision, which is one of Lovecraftian monsters, kinda. He cites H.P. Lovecraft as an influence in a way because Lovecraft often described his monsters as indescribable horrors, things that if you ever saw would drive you insane. Carpenter wanted to take this idea on board with his own creatures, making them pirates that you never fully get a look at. 99% of the time they are simply silhouettes of men that are clearly more than human but less than mortal. It's quite genius because this film never relies on explicit gore. It never uses kills and blood as a crutch, which a lot of films do, especially of the time. He built a horrifying time using only his masterful techniques of suspense and manipulation of fear. From what I understand, he got the idea from a visit to England in 1977 on a trip to see Stonehenge with his then girlfriend and co-writer of The Fog, Deborah Hill. She recalls that he saw in the distance an eerie fog and had the thought that he expressed saying, "What if there's something in that fog? Wouldn't that be scary?" Which is such a small and simple concept because yes, it would be fucking scary. Fear of the unknown is the drive of most horror films, and fog is just the familiar unknown that we live with. We experience it often and it isn't ever less creepy. It's what the Silent Hill franchise is built on, games and movies. It works on a level something like The Mist simply doesn't, because this film's horror isn't about unrelenting carnage or the undying nature of a man with psychosis. It's about the ever-present looming and steady travelling unknown. It's the same concept fundamentally as Michael Myers, as The Thing, but without a form, without a name, without rational explanation. It's the true encompassing feeling of approaching fear. And everything this film does works towards those ideas. The acting especially, the whole cast is brilliant. They bring back Jamie Lee Curtis from Halloween, who has noticeably improved since then. Tom Adkins gives a great performance. Hal Holbrook as Father Malone is close to the best performance. He definitely has the best scene in which he tells the story of his grandfather, but undeniably the greatest corner of this cast is Adrienne Barbeau as Stevie Wayne. Wayne acts as a sort of shining and guiding light, not only in the cast but as a maternal figure throughout the story. Not to mention she's in a literal lighthouse, the metaphor couldn't be any more clear. She's a brilliant, warm and caring mother to Andy, but as a radio host she helps guide, warn and inform the town of the events unfolding, which makes her a sort of guardian for the whole town and becomes a surrogate mother who protects all of her children using this broadcast. A broadcast that soundtracks the film with jazz that is in stark contrast to some of the harsh synth notes that strike intensity through the veins of this movie. The music also occasionally plays this small but noticeable foghorn that plays one note in a constant rhythm like a phone call unanswered. It's unsettling for sure and manages to make even the most mundane moments tense up, like staring at a plank of wood or becoming the theme of the ghosts approaching through the fog, and eventually it gives you the feeling that nobody is safe, not even children, not even Andy. Given the isolated feeling of the town, this all adds up to an incredibly suspenseful time that essentially tells us the story about stories. We're constantly reminded of different perspectives of the same story, like the priest's personal recollection of the events, like the campfire story of the 100-year-old events, like Nick Father's personal experience with the myth. And all of this is not unlike our current characters, whom are all experiencing this same story, that are all affected by the same wicked infliction on this town, but in different ways with different effects. But all of this is the costume of the film, because behind it is the story of the leper colony. Finding out those events weren't just a campfire story, they were factual. It tells us that the greed of man overthrows all, even at times religion and those who follow it. The quest of gold and money has corrupted men beyond all moral standards throughout history, and we continue to benefit from those moments of moral bankruptcy. But as we see, covered sins create unstable walls. The ending of the film tries to explain that it isn't about giving back what is owed, but taking responsibility for our ancestors' villainy, confronting our past, making right our past wrongs and creating an honest future. However, you can't always give back what you stole. You can't always take back the hurt you inflicted. Generational trauma still thrives despite those experiences, along with those who experienced them being dead. So to bring it back to the Poe quote, maybe the dream the quote is telling us about in this context is the lies we believe about our origins to make our present more palatable, or even our campfire stories and folklore, the dreams we tell within our dreams of a disillusioned reality that turn out to be the ugly truth. The past is truly the dream within our dream. So on the surface, The Fog is an incredibly unique ghost story that deserves more respect for its masterful technique and suspense building and effortless weaving of stories, but on the inside, it's a tale about being cautious with lies, with history and the stories we tell each other to make our reality more comfortable and our nights more frightening. Ghosts are the representation of things we thought were dead coming back to life, as the past has an irritating habit of doing. Carpenter will go on to make use of these themes of the unknown, of the shapeless fear, the endless isolation in The Thing, which proves to me that this film really is John Carpenter's underrated masterpiece. So if you've seen The Fog, let me know what you think about it, let me know what you think of this video. I read every single comment and reply to as many as possible, and whether it's a Carpenter classic or not, as always, keep watching movies.